senators out there.
I expect that the Biden presidency will give her a cabinet position or some sort of position working in in the administration, similar to how Obama gave her position at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Um, yeah,
She did get
but
one? I thought she didn't.
I mean, she headed it, right, and she created it with the
Well, yeah, she
blessing and
created
support
it.
of Obama.
She wasn't even allowed
Originally,
to run it.
originally Obama was actually opposed to the creation, I think, but they
I think
sort of
that's
met in
true,
the
yeah.
middle on that issue. Um, but I do think this is the last time we'll see Sanders. Far too old,
Yeah,
at
he's not going
least.
to run again. I don't think he should. Um, but I think if you look at the Joe Biden campaign, like all these people coming out, I just really don't get all these people getting mad about like groups like the Democratic Socialists of America coming out and saying, "Oh, we're not endorsing Joe Biden." Like, how is that surprising to anybody? I don't get that. Like, Joe Biden literally he's selling like bumper stickers on his website with the word socialist crossed out. Like, I'm a Democrat, not a socialist. Screw socialists. Like, I don't get why that's such a big deal to people that they're not endorsing him.
I think I think if Biden come 2020, uh, if come the election loses, I think most of the blame will probably, rightfully or not, will be placed at the Sanders camp, right, in the
Oh yeah,
socialists.
yeah, totally,
Um,
totally.
and I think, there is at least half merit to that, right? Like if you are a democratic socialist, right, and you're looking at the two options, right, like Joe Biden is far, far more progressive than Obama is, at least with the ideas that he's proposing. And he's more progressive than Hillary, right? And if it's a choice between Biden and Trump,
Not
like,
really that much. I wouldn't say far, far more progressive. And the question is he even going to fight for these things? Like he could say it now, but is he even going to fight for these things? I don't really know.
it's it's about which direction you want to move the country in, right? More than anything else, right? Like Joe Biden's direction is going to be very different than Trump's direction, and I think the biggest issue of 2020 will at least the most long lasting, impactful consequence will be the Supreme Court. Right? If Trump wins again and he gets two appointments with Breyer and Ginsburg, like you could have Karl Marx resurrected from the dead and elected, right? And he wouldn't
Yeah,
be able to get anything done at
that is
all,
true. That
right? If
is
the
true.
Supreme Court were that conservative. So I just think like, with the DSA and stuff, I like it makes me question how effectively they'll be able to actually compete on the political, like they're trying to compete more and more, right, to distinguish themselves. But if they're approaching issues like this, where it's my way or the highway, I just don't think they can effectively compete in a legitimate way.
Well, I mean, I definitely think he should be able to win without the support of the DSA, though. Like, he shouldn't need the help of the DSA. Like, he has scorned all their causes for a long time. They're not a very big organization, and I mean, there's probably a good portion of their members that are going to end up voting for Joe Biden anyway.
Yeah.
But if he comes out, like, I do get what you're saying there about the Supreme Court, and it's really right now. It's like you can maybe tell it's kind of like a tipping balance of skills. Like, how do I feel about this? Like, in terms of support that I want to give to Joe Biden, but I mean, I don't know. It's really kind of a reflection of me. But I think one of the most important things is like he's never asked for the socialist left's help to do anything. Until he does, it doesn't make sense to consider giving it to him. And I think there's no real evidence to suggest that he'll be anything more than kind of a caretaker president, someone who's just gonna kind of maybe establish things roughly back to the way they were as we continue to careen off the edges into just craziness. Like, I don't see that there's any evidence of that. So like that's a disturbing thing. And it's like, what does he stand for? What does he stand for? What's his big idea? Like, what's the narrative that he's selling? It doesn't seem that much different to anything that Hillary was selling before. We're just going to take you right back to normal, just right back the way it was. Close your eyes. Don't worry. Like,
Well, I mean, it depends on Obama, he did change the country a lot from 2008. He for example, right? He what do you call it? I'm blanking on the name of it right now, but created Obamacare, right? Joe Biden wants to expand Obamacare.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, like he also raised taxes, right? He did make the Bush era tax cuts permanent, but on wealthy people making over $400,000 a year, they did see a tax rate change. Like we saw Medicaid expansion, Medicare expansion, right? And then like with how Joe Biden is running, if you look at the policies he's pitching now compared to some of the policies Obama pitched in 2012, he's far, far more progressive. Same thing with Hillary Clinton, right? Like Hillary, she wanted to raise the minimum wage to $12 an hour. I think Biden officially at least supports a $15 minimum wage, supports decriminalizing border crossings, right? If he will do that, like
That is
knows, right?
that's a whole other question entirely, yeah. But I mean, I would have to say like Obamacare could have been a lot better. Like it's a bill that Mitt Romney was proposing like 15 years prior. Like that's like, and stuff like that gets so watered down so quickly. Like I forget what else you just said, but like that, like the entire history of Obama's presidency, I think undisputedly was just taking proposals, watering them down, and making just kind of compromise after compromise when it wasn't necessary, and not just aiming way too low, and then having a lot of your most signature proposals immediately get rolled back the moment a Republican government got into power.
I think at least with Obamacare, right? It was a lot harder. It was a compromise, of course, right? But this is just my like perspective. Like I'm obviously not like very liberal or progressive, but like if you look at it from a pragmatic point of view, like it was pretty difficult for the Democrats to pass the Affordable Care Act.
It could have been. They could have made it a lot easier for themselves, though. Like they went out of their way to like continuously do a debate with like the Republicans. We have to have this debate and this debate, and then the Republicans, like they were clearly not ready to make any kind of compromises. But for way too long, Obama was like trying to make compromise with them all the time. I mean, I think it's fair to say they could have easily, like they could have at least tried a little bit harder, or a lot harder, really, for at least a public option.
I think the Democrats are a lot less monolithic than the Republic. Well, maybe that's unfair, but on this issue, they were a lot less monolithic, right? So I think in the House, they passed it with in the Senate, they passed it with no Republican support. In the House, they passed it with one Republican, and I think something like 40 Democrats voted against it in the House. Because like the issue is it just like wasn't like polling very well among the country. All right, this like socialist takeover of healthcare. I think in the Senate, at least, like there was it got voted in by a very, very narrow margin. I think it was by like one vote or something like that.
Yeah, and we saw like someone like Joe Lieberman coming out and pulling the whole thing of we're gonna stop a public option, like, and all those like right wing Democrats that got literally immediately wiped out in the 2010 election for really, despite really their best efforts to appear Republican, they just were not Republican enough. I think that's like really where Obama and Bernie Sanders would differentiate, because Obama, while he is called the community organizer president, Bernie Sanders would actually be the community the organizer in chief, because he would I think more than anyone, because he I think more deeply than Obama maybe would care about getting this stuff passed and really marshal. For example, he said, if Joe Manchin would be an obstructing vote to my agenda in the Senate, I would do a rally in Joe Manchin's home state. I would maybe support a primary challenger against Joe Manchin. Like, that is kind of the stuff that we have not seen since FDR in terms of just kind of like political aggression. That would have been, I think, different than any other thing that we've seen, especially from the Democratic Party. Like, I mean, think you would think twice about passing like votes with no Republican support, or look to the Republicans for compromise, because that's just stupid. Like, if don't go out of your way to bend the knee to the Republicans when you don't have to. I think that's the number one thing that you can do. The bare minimum you could do as a Democrat.
Whenever the incumbent president fights his own party like this, they usually lose elections in the following year. Is sort of the big problem with that, I think.
But I think it depends what they're fighting for, though. Like, we saw FDR fight his own. I mean, he fought his own party. He was very successful. I mean, I think if you paint the right narrative, if you're very strong and have strong convictions, and you say and tell a strong narrative, like, this guy is standing in the way of you getting healthcare. Like, I think that could work.
I sort of disagree. Party politics is stronger now than it was back then. And at least, if you look at it, FDR was pretty moderate, actually, if you look at all of the Democratic potential nominees. And if you look at the entire political spectrum with people like Eugene Debs, right, when the Socialist Party in this country actually held power at the local and provincial level. So I think it's a very different time. Now, at least, I can't imagine the optics of a Joe Manchin versus Bernie Sanders showdown looking very good, right? Chances are it would.
When you say party politics, do you mean more of like people feeling allegiance to the Democratic Party? Because I don't necessarily see your point. I don't think many people feel allegiance to the Democratic Party.
Oh, I think. Well, I think Ezra Klein wrote an entire book on this, right? And I think I largely agree with his point of view that this country is more divided by party now than most things. It's sort of become an identity and identity politics. Like if we go back to like the 60s, right? We saw that this country, I think it's pretty legitimate to say that this country was more divided and more chaotic in the 60s politically than it is now. Would you agree?
Yeah, probably.
During the
like the Civil Rights Movement, like 1968, that kind of time period.
If you look at like pretty much any piece of legislation in the 60s, but I'll look at I'll look at the Civil Rights Act, right, of 64 as an example. You saw that vote was pretty polarizing, right? But it was polarizing not by party, but by ideology. Right, you had Southern Democrats sort of vote against it, right, and you had these like Republicans living in rural middle states also opposing it, but then you also had Northeastern Republicans supporting it, right, or Democrats on it was like the parties were a lot more diverse, right? If you look at in the 60s, the party platform of the Republican Party on something like abortion, right, I don't even think they took a stance on abortion. So the parties were a lot more diverse. Right now, issues are more polarized by party, where even issues that sort of like poll well among most voters, right, they're still polarized. And that's because people choose more to identify with the party, right? And that's probably a bad thing, right? And it definitely doesn't help Sanders or pretty much anyone far.
I mean, maybe
spectrum.
Among Democratic primary, like Democratic registered voters, like Democratic people who vote in Democratic primary, I think you may be more closer to correct there. But like if you're looking at the general population of the United States and you just pluck a person at random from the United States, I think it's very unlikely that you'll say like I'm proud to be a Democrat. I'm proud to be a member of the Democratic Party. Maybe you say like I'm proud to think, for example, I'm proud of my guns, for example, on the Republican side, or I'm proud to support like abortion. I mean, I don't think people are willing to quote unquote like fight to the death to protect the Democratic Party, because like let's face it, like the Democratic Party has not, at least in very recent terms, like they have not produced a lot of good. Like they haven't produced like they haven't been very successful. Like there's not many people that are waving the Democratic like finger, like they don't have like the foam finger with the D on it. Like I don't think that's like where most people are at, if you get what I'm saying.
I think if you look at at least in 2018, right, and more recently this Wisconsin Supreme Court election, like we can see that, the Democrats, like I think sort of they're far from dead as a party right now.
Yeah. But like I think people like they run more on their individual brands is what I'm saying.
To be honest, I don't know if I were to agree with that, right? People